is why you should use the Twinblades in Vrising 1.1. The Twinblades have been added in the Vrising Oakvale update and are an incredibly versatile weapon and can fit into just about any build. Its Q is a point-and-click AoE, which will pierce counters and also cause a little bit of knockback, and if left alone, it will retract and deal damage to anything in its path, causing even more AoE damage. However, while it's in this projectile form, it can be countered. Alternatively, you can also recast your Q to dash toward where it originally landed, allowing you to reposition or potentially dodge other attacks. Its E is a lunge forward that will also throw whatever you hit over your shoulder, enabling a variety of combos or getting enemies into the middle of your team. But the most important feature of the Twinblades? Gardening. And with the quick guide out of the way, let's get into a more detailed guide. Greetings, mortals! It is I, Remortis, and today we are back into Vrising's 1.1 update, which with it came 3 new lovely weapons. In particular, the Twinblades, which is what we'll be going over in this video. And of the 3 weapons, the Twinblades is probably most likely to end up in your arsenal, as it is a very versatile weapon and can fit in just about any build you can think of. We'll be going over all the tips and tricks you can use with the Twinblades, such as specific combos or perhaps even some builds to consider. Although because of how versatile this weapon is, the builds don't really matter too much, but we'll still cover it nonetheless. Alright, enough of me yapping, let's just get right into it, shall we? So to even unlock the Twinblades, we need to defeat one of the new bosses added in 1.1, Gaius the Cursed Champion. He's a pretty fun fight and might be a little bit challenging for some folks, and he can be found in the middle of the Colosseum. Simply interact with the banner and engage him. When you fight him, he'll create an arena-type environment, similar to how the dueling flag works. An arena will surround you and slowly shrink as you fight. A lot of his movesets will try to knock you out of the ring, and you'll take damage when you're outside of this ring. Same thing goes for him too, so if you manage to knock him out there, he'll take a ton of damage. So weapons such as the spear, the mace, or the greatsword can be great tools that you can utilize to help knock him out of the arena and just do a ton of damage to him. So the Twinblade actually has a really strong auto attack, or primary attack, meaning when you just hold down your left click. Each attack will attack twice and end up dealing the equivalent of 60, 60, and 80% physical damage. This is almost as powerful as the greatsword. However, the way that it attacks twice is very useful. Most notably, I think that the Twinblades make an excellent choice to use when you're fighting Leandra and fighting off all those little ghosts. You can just spam your left click and you'll pretty much destroy all of them quite easily. Because of the way this attacks and how quickly it comes out, if you have ways to increase your attack speed and to do bursts of damage, this could be a really powerful tool to use to surprise your opponents. Whether it be running a max attack speed build or using spells such as Blood Rage or Power Surge, or the Electric Dash, or even combining it with the Axe Q. If you do certain combos correctly with those burst of speeds, you can do a surprising amount of damage in a short amount of time. And moving on to the Q, known as Javelin, it is a targeted area of effect that when it lands, it will knock anybody away from it, and also do a pretty hefty chunk of damage. And then if you leave it alone for a few seconds afterwards, it'll retract to you and will damage everything in a line in an AoE as it comes back to you. However, if it collides with anything solid, such as a wall, it will completely stop it in its tracks. Similarly, it also can be countered, so be cautious with that. Some people might use that to advantage when they notice that it's colliding back towards you. Another use for the Javelin, though, is if you decide to reactivate your Q before the retraction, you'll make a dash toward its direction, pulling yourself towards where the Javelin is. However, this is a fixed distance, though, so if you're incredibly far away from your Javelin, you won't be able to make it to the Javelin. And if you do it point blank, you'll stop at the Javelin. So it's just something to kind of keep in mind if you think that the projectile will harm you, or perhaps you might need to use it to escape something. Or perhaps you might want to use it also to reach somebody and maybe combo it with your E or another ability. And speaking of our E, this is honestly why I think this weapon is so incredible. The E, Sweeping Strike, will lunge you forward and you'll flip somebody over your shoulder. This is an incredibly powerful tool to use, especially in teamfight situations, if you manage to catch up to your fleeing target and throw them over your shoulder into the middle of your team. Not to mention that this can enable a lot of really cool combos. If you want to see the more in-depth combos for the Twinblade, I highly encourage you to watch TerribleTimmy's videos, as he goes a lot more into the combos than I'm going to in this video. The combos I do want to notably talk about is Twinblade E into Reaper Q. This is a true combo in that your enemy cannot even respond if you manage to land the initial E. So as you do that, you will use your E on your Twinblade and immediately switch to your Reaper and hit a Q. This Q from the Reaper will knock them back, whatever the direction is that they landed from behind you. So this is a really effective combo to allow your team to capitalize on the new position of your enemy. Another really good combo is the Twinblade E into the Axe Q, and immediately switch back to the Twinblade and just annihilate them with a couple of primary attacks. Now, there are some other good combos that aren't necessarily true combos, meaning that if your enemy has some kind of defensive or a dash, they could get out of it. One of my favorites to also catch things is using the Greatsword Q into your Twinblade E. There is a little pause in between there, so your enemy can escape it, but if they don't have their defensives up, this is phenomenal for exploiting that. And again, getting them into your team so they can help obliterate that target. Alternatively, you can also use your Twinblade E into a Spear Q, although that does take a little bit of time. However, it can be really devastating should you manage to land it. And of course, you can finish off with the final part of the Spear Q to knock them further into your team. And then another thing to consider as you're using this weapon, whether you're using it for combos or just using the Q, while I do think this is a really good weapon, I think it's really good in larger fights, such as 2v2s or beyond that, such as squads. Mainly because the Q does a pretty solid amount of damage in an AoE and knocks people back, whether you want them knocked towards you or knock away from you, and oftentimes people forget that the blade is going to retract towards you, and sometimes you can combo on this quite well. Not to mention that it's fantastic in PvE if you're fighting a ton of mobs, or again, if you're fighting in PvP with squads, this can be quite nice for some surprise damage that people weren't expecting it. And before we move on further, I definitely want to talk about the legendary variant of the Twinblade, which is strictly better than the normal version. The legendary version, the Fate Dancers, will cause your initial hit landing of your Q to cause chill, and when it returns, it will make anybody that's chilled frozen. This is fantastic, especially if you have other ways to inflict chill on your other targets, or perhaps some of your teammates do. And then beyond that, your E will deal 50% bonus damage to anybody that's chilled or frozen, so that's pretty nice. It doesn't do the most damage, but it's still more damage nonetheless. And for how you might want to build your legendary Twinblade, you could either go with the full physical build or you could use it with a spell build. The Twinblade could be useful for both physical and spell casting builds. If you decide to go in high physical power, the Q does a surprising amount of damage for very minimal investment. If you land that Q, you can easily hit upwards of 150 or more on a crit, for example. However, another thing to consider why it's really good for spellcasters is that the Q, whether it's retracting or the initial hit itself, it's essentially a way to zone your enemies. Whether you might want to corral them or go to a certain direction, you can combo that with a Reaper E or just other spells to make them go wherever you desire. And also, when it's retracting, you also can use your dash to kind of help make your retraction hit that target. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but the fact that you can still use it as a zoning tool is fantastic. And if anything comes too close to you, or perhaps you manage to catch somebody out with your E, again, it's a phenomenal team fighting tool as well. And as for what weapons go really well with Twinblades, hands down, I think the Reaper is probably one of the better options, because you can use the Q from the Twinblade and the E from the Reaper to do a ton of zoning, or perhaps even do some cool combos with the long range, although the Reaper E is a little bit weaker than it used to be, though it's still pretty solid. And of course, the Twinblade E with the Reaper Q is phenomenal as well. The Greatsword and the Spear also make fantastic combinations with the Twinblade, with the variety of combos we discussed earlier. And of course, you can't go wrong having the Slasher or pistols for your iframe abilities. Axes are also a really good pair with the Twinblade, whether you're using the Q from the axes to get your enhanced attack speed to make your Twinblades attack even faster, or perhaps you're doing a combo with the Axe E into Twinblade, or whatever it might be. Of course, if you are running the legendary Twinblades, you might consider running the legendary Mace as well, especially if you're going on the physical side of things, as the legendary Mace also benefits from having your targets being frozen. Just something for you to consider. And as for spells that pair well with the Twinblade, honestly, really anything can go here, because it's just such a versatile weapon. If you're trying to lean on the spellcaster side of things, maybe you might look for more zone control spells such as Aftershock, or if you are more physical inclined and using the legendary weapon, perhaps you might try to use some chill effects. A sample build you might consider would be Veil of Frost, so you can get your cold dashes and potentially chilling and freezing on targets if you land your Veil attack. Either Cold Snap or Frost Barrier for a defensive, and also have more chances to inflict chill or freeze. And in this build in particular, I'm going to be using Unholy Chains, just because it's a little bit different, and I really like the combos, especially if you manage to combine the chains with a Frozen Mace E, if your Mace Q is on cooldown anyways. And we'll go more in depth on this build in a later video, but for now here's some footage just so you can kind of see the Twinblade in action. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to get any of my team fights where I actually utilized the Twinblades to good effect, but hopefully you can kind of visualize it in your head, or if maybe you've already seen it in game. Anyways, I'm just going ahead and just let the footage roll. See, I did want to include at least some fights that I lost, especially against this guy. This guy gave me a run for my money, and honestly, the fights here that I won are probably some of the very few I won that night. This guy pretty much swept the floor with me. But I still wanted to showcase the build nonetheless. And really, that's the guide. The Twinblades are a phenomenal addition to Vrising, and I really hope you guys get to enjoy them. Hopefully not on the receiving end, but you might end up having that. Especially considering how our arsenal is limited to a maximum of 8 weapons, you might see the Twinblade pop up quite often, especially in teamfight situations. Please like, comment, subscribe for more guides like these. I should have a lot more coming up very soon, and I hope to see you in the next one. Farewell for now.